Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. The Vienna Gambit is my favourite opening in chess. When I explore my games on chess.com, where I've managed to play f4, the beginning of the Vienna Gambit, I win roughly 2/3 of those games. The best response to the Vienna Gambit is d5, which isn't obvious. In fact, only one opponent thus far has responded with d5, and when I chatted with them after the match, they were a fellow Vienna Game enthusiast. Today, my opponent also responded with d5, entering the main line of the Vienna Game, and this game shows some of the ideas of the main line. Please enjoy! Let's start with the review. So chess.com's algorithm, and as you can see, I did very well in this game. So overall accuracy about 85%, which is a little bit better than my opponent at around 70%. And we both had some good moves, some inaccuracies. As my opponent, I think, was less familiar with the Vienna game, they had more inaccuracies and mistakes and one blunder. And their blunder occurred fairly early, sort of towards the end of the opening, and I was able to maintain the advantage afterwards. Let's now move on to the analysis. Okay, so I started this game with the white pieces, e4, e5, knight c3, so the Vienna game. Opponent played knight f6, and I usually, in this situation, play the Vienna Gambit, f4. Now, those of you who've been following my channel, I've had quite a few Vienna Game in Vienna Gambit videos. You'll know that you absolutely should not accept the Gambit by capturing the pawn. And there is, in fact, only one good response, only one good move to the Vienna Gambit, which is d5. And the opponent played d5 in the game, and I was a bit surprised. Most of the time, my opponents will play some other move, which would usually be suboptimal. d5 is the best move, and d5 enters the Vienna game main line. Now, in this game, once you enter the main line, there needs to be some immediate trades in the center. So pawn captures pawn, that's a necessity, otherwise they're going to attack my knight. And with the attack on my knight there, that basically forces the capture. And here, generally, you would not capture back. That would not be the correct move. So here, knight f3, so still in theory, and very commonly now the opponent will capture my knight with their knight, which is what they did. And at this point, we are sort of largely equal. And generally, you can capture that knight with either the D or the B pawn. However, in this game, I wanted to maintain the center. And so I wanted to potentially advance the D pawn to D4. And so I will have to capture with the B pawn. And that supports a good sort of a chain of pawns and control the center. With the now open B file, there's a potential for the rook, the queen's rook, to attack down that file, especially once that bishop moves out of the way. Now, effectively, if I move the rook to b1, that places some constraints on how quickly the opponent can develop that light squared bishop. They played c6, which apparently was an inaccuracy. I played d4, so good control of the center now. So the alternative move is in fact immediate b1. Opponent now plays g4, so they've moved their bishop out of the way, which will mean that an eventual rook b1 would be potentially quite powerful. And at this point, I'm not too worried about that capture since I could simply just capture back. However, I did want to potentially not have my rook pinned, my knight pinned to my queen. So I opted to sort of immediately ask the question, what were they going to do with that bishop? Here they played bishop h5, which is the best move. And so given that they didn't move back along the diagonal, I opted to unpin the knight by bishop e2. So apparently, again, this is not the most accurate move. Immediate rook b1 is. However, I thought that this was still quite a reasonable move. And now setting up for a potential castle with the rook on the f file, it now also defends the knight, and it places pressure now on the potential weak f pawn. The opponent now makes their blunder, so pawn f6. So this movement seriously weakens the king side. And remember, part of the plan is potentially to attack down that f file. This is not a real threat. It's protected now by the knight. There's even a possibility of just pushing that pawn forward as well. Here I opted to short castles. They played bishop e7, which I suppose is okay, but if you look at the evaluation, it's already +6. So this is how problematic this position is for black. I now play rook b1. They capture, and that capture, as you can see, now opening up the f file is another serious mistake. +11, where they're actually up by 1 pawn. I capture back now with the knight. They sort of make an aggressive push with their light square bishop, which is a mistake because I can capture back with queen, and things are looking very powerful now. So the queen, there's potential check here. If the queen goes to the f file, potential checkmate sort of possibilities. The knight is defending these two squares. It's danger territory, I think, for the opponent. They play rook f8, and I can sort of understand wanting to sort of create some complications and threats. However, I just opted to just straight up capture that rook. Apparently, that move, queen to h5, would have been better. I suppose I could see why. However, I thought this was a more conservative move. The problem with that is that the pawns start getting into the way, and I just didn't want to calculate down that line. So now that sort of forces the king to move, basically sort of meaning, of course, that castling is no longer possible. I decide to move queen to f3, now with check, forcing the king to move a second time. Or they opted to block with the bishop, which is potentially a good move as well. However, now I have the bishop move along the dark diagonal, so bring the bishop into the party. King now forced to g8. And now I have, because I never protected that b file, the rook is now part of the attacking force. So rook captures pawn, now on the 7th rank. Rooks on the 7th rank are powerful. Things looking really bad for black. Captures, and here I have check. Now obviously can't checkmate because it is still guarded by the bishop, but that forces king to the corner to h8. Capture that bishop, and +10, so looking very good. So now really it's a matter of playing accurately so that I don't sort of end up with a problem. Obviously, this is potentially checkmate next turn, so the opponent must deal with that potential threat. So they did the move I expected, which was queen to g8. Here, I thought there was an opportunity to push that, push forward the pawn to e6. So once the pawn gets to the 7th rank as well, it effectively can force trade. So potentially I could force a trade of either one of the other pieces for the pawn. They bring the knight out of the way to sort of have an extra defender. That sort of makes sense. Here, I thought I'd just straight up capture their queen, which is sort of their major defender. I thought that was still good for me. As mentioned, the plan before, pawn to e7. Opponent sort of blocks the defense of that pawn from the bishop. That's okay. So my goal here is to potentially force a trade. So rook to d7. Potentially I can then go rook d8 with check, forcing a trade and then promotion. However, they made the right move, so that's no longer possible with the queen, providing a sort of an extra defense. However, I can still, ask the question: are you going to trade? Are you going to trade? Because if they don't trade, I can capture the rook next turn. Opponent now makes a potentially good move by bringing the the knight to defend. However, now it's no longer defending that pawn. So bishop captures. Bishop is now defending again. And so the opponent is in some trouble again because the king can no longer capture that pawn. They kind of make a bit of a non-move, I suppose. And here, again, another forcing move. The king cannot capture the rook. The king cannot capture the pawn, so it must move out of the way. And here I have the opportunity to capture, because if the knight captures back, this will be promoted to queen with check, no less, and they will lose the knight and move afterwards. So very good transformation, very happy. So here I need to, of course, now move the rook out of the way. Potentially, I thought I could sort of capture some of those pawns, maybe capture the next one. Opponent, tries to threaten the bishop, but that's easy to sidestep. Bishop to a3. Random, pawn move, I suppose. Pretty much checkmate is almost guaranteed now. Plus 62. And there we go. So that allows for now promotion, protected by the rook. The knight is lost. And then a simple ladder mate. So mate could be here, mate could be there. I chose mate by moving queen to g8. So good game with the opponent. GG. Unfortunately for my opponent, the advancing of the f-pawn to f6 towards the end of the opening was a serious mistake, as it critically weakened the defences on the kingside and the f-file. And one of the potential strategies of the Vienna game is to attack down the f-file. My early opening up of the b-file also allows a queen's rook to attack down this file should the light square bishop move. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.